Trump in a week that really could be make or break, as key witness Michael Cohen took the stand, unloaded on Trump, definitely hurt him, but then found himself on defense, with Trump's fate now hanging in the balance.
The star witness takes the stand against Donald J. Trump.
Michael Cohen, now the star witness in the New York versus Trump trial. Cohen on the stand.
The ex-president coming face to face with the man who used to do his dirty work, who now has turned into the key witness.
Telling the court, quote, everything required Mr. Trump's sign-off.
Will Cohen keep his cool when Trump's lawyers begin what could be an intense cross-examination?
I think the punches are building cumulatively. I think Tuesday there were bruises, and today there's blood.
Mr. Cohen is a bad human being.
If I was a juror in this case, watching that, I would think this guy's making this up as he's going along.
Is he making it up as he goes along? We've heard different people, legal experts, longtime journalists, and just other observers who've been close to this falling. And I can tell you I was inside the courtroom, as you saw there, several times covering this trial, including that key cross on Thursday. And Cohen did give the DAs what they wanted, including corroboration of what he says were real-time proof of Trump being in on this criminal scheme. But as Thursday continued, the defense continued to chip away at his credibility. Monday, the prosecution had Cohen narrating the entire hush money scheme. It looked bad for defendant Trump. The questions were about the catch and kill, the Playboy model, and the adult actress. Cohen testified Trump knew there would be a, quote, significant impact on his presidential campaign if these stories came out. Prosecutors pressed Cohen about the Daniels payment, and Cohen said Trump was angry to learn the whole thing had resurfaced. I thought you took care of this, an angry Trump said, according to Cohen's testimony. I thought this was under control. Just take care of it. And Cohen recounted what he did was at the direction of and the benefit for Trump. This was a damning picture, and that Trump was not only in on everything, but sharing in real time his own motives. In other words, if you believe Cohen, you now have the motive piece, and you don't even need Cohen for the tabloid and the money piece because you have other witnesses and the checks. So that looked bad. It was bad for defendant Trump, and we reported on it. And then came the cross-exam. And whatever happens in this historic trial, this is what everyone's been gearing up for, because over several days, you had these defense attorneys going at Cohen's credibility, not just saying he changed his story. That was previewed, and the jury had been told that already. But that he continues to dissemble and lie, not just about the core evidence in this case, but about other unrelated stuff. And that his personal vendetta has not only clouded his judgment, but that he personally cares so much, as he confirmed, they raised questions about whether that has colored or even distorted his ability to tell the truth on the stand. Trump's defense aggressively pushing and questioning Joel Cohen on all kinds of things. And let's be clear, and I've mentioned this in my reporting thus far, some of it didn't completely add up. Some of it didn't create a logical counterstory. But cumulatively, over the days, as I've told you, it did appear to poke holes in not only Cohen's credibility, but something else that jurors may care about. They're human beings, and they're trying to decide who to believe. Whether he, over time, went straight and told the truth, or continued to be a kind of angry, unreliable person who was constantly publicly insulting the man he used to look up to.
Donald cares for no one or anything other than himself.
I know what Mr. Trump is. He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat. And I am going to jail in part because of my decision to help Mr. Trump hide that payment from the American people before they voted a few days later.
Do you remember that moment? That's now about 4.5, 5 years ago, and we've got all the way up to this trial, the only trial that Trump is facing after effectively delaying the others with an assist from his own appointees on the conservative-leaning Supreme Court. So on the one hand, some people look at what you just saw there, and they see a whistleblower. They see someone who made mistakes but came clean. Other people, though, and this is what the defense is pushing, might see someone who had one story to benefit in one way and another story when he got caught, and maybe even another story as time went on. So they pushed him on the kind of resistance figure he's become with a podcast that repeatedly, meticulously documents his time with Trump and his turning against Trump, and T-shirts that show his one-time boss and mentor now in a prison cell, and how much he's motivated potentially by revenge. The man wrote a book called Revenge. Trump's lawyer also just tried to, at sometimes, just bait him. You can see the cartoonist, the sketch artist there showing a lawyer who looks like clearly the most upset person in the room or the most heated in this moment, saying, we're not asking for your beliefs. The jury doesn't want to hear what you think happened. He also called him a liar at one point, and Cohen responded and rebutted that. The courthouse in Lower Manhattan also became something of a MAGA gathering place. And what you see on your screen is not normal. I want you to understand that. I try to cover this stuff very fairly with the evidence. The people assembled to attack the rule of law, to undermine the actual jury that's sitting, which is legally authorized to make this decision. Those were the right-wing Republicans that gathered in person to do that, including the highest-ranking Republican in the federal government, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and other lawmakers. You see him there making this political pilgrimage. And then he was outflanked to his right by Matt Gaetz, the figure who helped topple the last speaker and who clearly has leverage over the current speaker, along with some other right-wing figures. They're there. They lionize Trump in the same way Cohen used to, and they're saying things that Trump has actually been busted for saying in violation of the gag order, and so he's sort of handed that off, which some experts say could be a second violation, a new violation of the gag order, or 11th or 12th, literally, as they came out and did Trump's dirty work.
The judge inside, his daughter is making millions of dollars running against Donald Trump, raising money for Donald Trump's political opponents.
The judge's own daughter is making millions of dollars doing online fundraising for Democrats.
The judge's daughter is a political operative and raises money for Democrats.
What you just heard is wrong. And it's not just coming from a beleaguered defendant desperately trying to muddy the waters or from his own random paid political hacks, but from people who are leaders in government. If you've been watching our special coverage, you may have noticed that we at MSNBC are trying very hard to cover this very historic trial fairly. You'll see on people from both sides. You'll see independent legal experts. You'll see people say things about the trial where some people might get mad, but don't shoot the messenger. We're just telling you how the trial is going. There's no two sides, though, to what you just heard there. A, it might be a gag order violation if, as one reporter said, Donald Trump was publicly, personally writing those lines, because it's a violation of the gag order to instruct others on behalf of the defendant to attack family members, children of the judge, as it should be. But second, and more widely, I want to be clear. Those officials have every right to attend the trial, to observe it, have every right to weigh in on it to some degree. But they have systematically, several of them I just played for you and several others who've come to town, they haven't just done that. They have undermined the rule of law in advance, before this jury even hears the case. They have contributed to an environment where if they don't get the result they want, they will say, oh, we've already been attacking this court. And if they do, it's entirely possible that the defendant could be acquitted or have a hung jury and thus not be convicted. Then they'll just move right along without any apparent care for the system of government that they're in. Remember, they're not just random commentators. They are members of the government, which has three branches, and this is one of them. And it is the judicial branch that is supposed to be respected precisely because it is the less partisan branch. It doesn't just do press releases. We haven't heard the DA respond to any of those politicians, let alone the judge. And yet these people who know how it works are undermining it. When I say it's not normal, I mean it's not normal and it's not done. We have had a tradition of presidents in both parties, it's changed recently with the one who's on trial, but a tradition of saying, we'll wait to hear what the jury decides and we will respect the ruling, the decision of the jury, just as you must respect Supreme Court rulings, because otherwise the whole system crumbles and you don't have a rule of law democracy anymore. So while this may look like a Trump, anti-Trump thing, it's actually a much larger problem. And I promise you, if folks show up at Democrat Bob Menendez's corruption trial and do the same thing, I will tell you about it. So far, we haven't seen that happen. In fact, we haven't seen prominent Democratic politicians go there. I say that as a matter of fact. We can't do false equivalence when there's no equivalence to the underlying situation. But we have to be careful at a time where people have already attacked the last peaceful transfer of power and that election, which had no real question about the winner. The current president won by 3 states. The Supreme Court didn't take any appeals. There were none strong enough to even hear, let alone overturn the results. But you know what happened. We had an insurrection, and now we have that same crowd challenging the next election because Trump might lose. They're worried he'll lose, and they're already challenged that, and now they're challenging the judicial process of our fellow citizens to judge him as they should judge any other defendant, because that's what happens when you live in a rule of law democracy. So while this trial is about the verdict, it's also about so much more.